All right. Good morning and welcome to B Cube Sunday morning. We are exceptionally blessed this week. I'm going to let Tom do the introduction of his guests because he always he does it with flair. And
Well, sometimes I use a Bic rather than a flare.
okay,
Yeah.
and you know the
Oh,
it's just great, and we are excited now over the fact that this is next weekend. We're going to be doing this, and I have no idea exactly how we're going to do it, meaning guests, and are we going to have dancing, dancing and singing, but we're doing it from RadCon. RadCon is a science fiction convention here in the Tri Cities, Washington, and it's a fun convention. And yes, we are. I don't know if we are streaming to Facebook. Somebody asked me the question, but I see that we have people
Okay.
following
Good.
us.
We have Jeff. We're set.
Okay,
All right.
good. Now, so what we got is we're appearing up there with some incredible people. Jeff Sturgeon, who is doing the art for our upcoming book, Our American. Did Karen just tell you I got over being and so what's the name of our book, Karen?
Our American Storm.
Thank you. It's always good to have somebody who is more sane than you are.
wasn't Gale Storm and R. Miss Brooks? So we're getting confusion there.
Say that again.
Wasn't Gale Storm the star of R. Miss Brooks? So
yeah. Jeff Sturgeon has done the cover. He's going to be there, and if when you really get bored, Brock, because Tom will tell you what he does, but he's somebody who can tell us about the cover subtleties. But
on a good day.
Oh yeah, Karen will get it to you. The beautiful thing is though that we're going to be there, and David Gerald is going to be the writer guest of honor. Karen and I and Tom will all be there. We're doing a student workshop. We're going to try and tell the kids. It's not that we hate your story. It's just we'll get there. But anyway, it's going to be a fun time at that. So with that said, I'm going to go back and sit in the background and watch and answer questions. And I'm going to leave Tom and Karen to introduce their guests and tell us about a great day coming.
Okay.
all right.
I want to jump in and say that also at RadCon will be B Cubed Press editors Deborah Godfrey and Manny Frischberg, and they are both on panel and have a lot of great stuff to say. Tom, can I talk a little bit about why we're having this particular panel? And then I'll let you introduce the guests.
Absolutely.
We're having this because it only takes 5 minutes on Facebook to be confronted by people saying, I just read a study that says such and such, and I'm never going to eat an avocado again. Or, people pick up one study, or they get these crazy ideas, or I have a friend who believes everything that RFK says. And it is like arguing with people. It's like Jello wrestling. You just don't know what to get a grip on, where to start with information. A few years ago, by complete accident, I came across a really good source of scientific information, but I've been shocked to discover that no one else I know knows what it is. And why would they believe me if I told them to go there? So I thought that since Tom and I know a couple of people with a lot of expertise in this area, that we would bring Brock Kraft and Allan Dyen-Shapiro in to chat with us. Some of you may know Allan because he's been in a bunch of B Cubed books, as well as in a bunch of other science fiction venues. Brock is someone new who we're going to introduce to you. Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Okay. we'll actually, I was hoping this would be a Super Bowl free discussion because I am so much not a sports person and it gets really boring to me. Brock is a professor at UW in information science, and he's a specialist on information display. And Allan is a teacher and has taught science. And we want to help people get a little bit of a sense about how to tell whether what you're looking at actually makes sense and what it really means. I will let each of them say a little bit about what they think their particular expertise is. Brock, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. And, I'm really glad that sports isn't going to make its way into a discussion today. I don't even like baseball, and apparently something big is happening today. So my background is in human-computer interaction and data visualization. And so I've been studying and teaching for a couple decades on how we display information and making the translation from data that's collected to data that's presented. So I'm a professor at the University of Washington here in Seattle, as Tom said, and I'm very happy to join you guys today.
I'm Allan Dyen-Shapiro. I'm a PhD biochemist. I had, if you count my PhD, a 19-year science career, then kind of a career chaos phase in which I did everything from patent law to supporting myself with my guitar. And then I landed as a high school teacher because I thought that was the most important thing that I could do to kind of change the dynamic of, at the time, it was largely climate change denial, but there's a lot more things that have come up since then in terms of anti-science attitudes. And I've been one ever since. And amidst that, I was also able to start a writing career. So I have lots of short stories out in various venues. With B Cubes Press, I had 2 stories in Southern Truths, and I've got a few other things out, and been in a bunch of anthologies, been in some major magazines, and I'm happy to come and talk about any of it.
So let's go with the idea of how do we know, how do we get people who are publishing information to put enough information about their information, the meta information, into what they're doing so that we can tell what they're saying? I was recently thinking about the question of battery life for an iPhone, right? You see a lot of things talking about ways to improve the battery life. There are 2 clearly different definitions of battery life that people can be using. One is how long will the battery last during a day while I'm using it? How much time can I get out of it with that? But the other is, what can I do to keep it from bursting into flame and destroying everything 6 months down the road? These definitions of battery life have different uses, but people use the term without saying which one they're using and what they're using it for. How do we work to get people to actually say what they're saying?
Well, one thing you can do is you can use your own social media to correct what you see that's wrong on the internet or in the mainstream media. And it's surprising how far the reach of that goes. I had probably my biggest success is when I saw reporting that was just plain wrong on climate issues, and I put something out on my Facebook page, essentially correcting it. And within 2 days, with only one person in between us, the journalists had corrected their story, because that's how quick it went from one to the other. So if you actually know something is wrong, the people who write it don't want to be wrong. So put it out there.
Yeah, I mean, cite your sources, right? Like, where is this coming from? I mean, I remember back in the olden times when Wikipedia was new and it was like just this, implausible thing, and there were no citations. You kind of just had to kind of go with it. It's like, oh, well, I don't know. Some rando on the internet posted this on Wikipedia. It must be not plausible. I don't know. But nowadays, of course, the editorial decisions have been made at the Wikimedia Foundation to make it, make it necessary to put citations for sources. So, and of course, in academic practice, if you're putting something out there, you kind of have to define what your terms are and who your sources are, and that's just the way it works. Translating that scientific practice into the public domain for just general, to the general public is certainly a challenge, Tom, and I think that's what you're pointing to.
That's certainly one of the things I'm pointing to.
Yeah.
I think that we're all pretty aware of the degree to which the journalism profession has shot itself in the foot. I'm a journalist. I have a degree from Columbia Journalism School, and I'm ashamed of most of what's coming out. But now I want to turn my guns on the academics and point out that there have just been some horrendous reveals of prominent academics, often the more prominent, the worse they are, publishing falsified data. I was thinking of the guy who came out and said that the autism studies that were discredited. But New Yorker just had an article this past week about someone who came out with completely false information about the risk of Tylenol for pregnant women, for nursing women.
Right.
And it turned out it was based on one utterly falsified study, and it changed the prescription of Tylenol 3 all over the world. And the retractions have never gotten disseminated, so that people are still doing horrible things based on this one theory. How do we restore public confidence in science when prominent scientists are discredited?
I think you have to draw a distinction between scientists and people with a public role that uses science. So I think the best example I can give that is in the early days of the COVID epidemic, when the government, including Fauci, put out that you really don't need these N95 masks. The cloth masks are just fine. And they had in their mind that there's going to be hoarding. We know Americans, they are just going to hoard it. And if they're not going to use it for themselves, they're going to sell it. So there has to be some way of doing that. So in a job as the head of public health, Fauci's job was to figure out the most convenient lie sometimes to Americans to get them to do what aren't going to kill a lot of other Americans. That's different from a scientist. A scientist publishes all the caveats. A scientist will be very careful in what they put out most of the time. That doesn't mean that there aren't very, very busy people who sometimes have a lab that's probably too big, and they can't follow what's going on with all their postdocs and graduate students. And then it's a matter of, when it gets called to their attention, what do they do about it? And
I have to jump in and say that the problem that in the New Yorker article about Tylenol 3 was the exact opposite. There was a huge lab, and the primary investigator was publishing all these findings, and he was putting his postdocs' names on it, and they hadn't been part of the experiment. They were horrified.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's really, I mean, I want to say that I see some reverberation in sort of these CEOs and bigwigs who do these horrible things, and their staff is unable to stop them. I think we're all familiar with that paradigm, and we're seeing a lot of it in the Epstein files.
But a lot of this is related to, there is so much good for the person they're, putting them on the whole publish or perish thing. If you get your name on the paper, it makes a big difference to whether you're hireable or not.
Yeah, there are perverse incentives for sure. But let me just jump in and say, but science is messy. Science is, it's the case that published scientific papers can be wrong, and that's part of the process. And so you may find that a paper is published, and then 40 years later, somebody has a result that directly contradicts the published paper. And so we, have a discourse about that. There's another published paper, questions are raised, scientists talk. things are wrong, and that's just the way it is. But unfortunately, public policy isn't really that's not great for public policies. If there's a difference in what the understanding is, like, this nuance of quantum mechanics is now complete. We were wrong about that. Dark matter doesn't exist. That can happen, and that's just the scientific process. But if you're trying to make sure public health is preserved, that's a challenge for sure.
Allan, you teach high school students. And I assume that when you teach them science, part of what you teach them is about how to evaluate science as it's presented publicly. How do you teach them what Brock just talked about, that part of science is a discussion and people being right and people being wrong and things evolving, because the public doesn't get this? How do we teach students to understand it?
Well, I'll answer that in two parts. What I did up until about 5 or 6 years ago and what I'm doing now. Up until about 5 or 6 years ago, you basically got students to jump right in, because smart high school students can be taught to read the scientific literature. I've only taught at high poverty schools, and so this is not an elite, something that can only be done with the elite kids. But we had a policy of a mandatory science fair where the students had to write it up in technical writing language, their project, as sophomores. And I had about 70% of the students doing technical writing at a level that I didn't reach until I began grad school. And then when we taught the more advanced classes, like I taught a dual enrollment community college high school biology class, or Bio 1 class, we would show them the scientific literature. And I had kids that in one of the schools I was at, they were specifically identified as the B through D kids, the kids who were third tier, who weren't the IB kids, who weren't the AP kids, but they were able to take a scientific paper, get the gist of it, in terms of biology, to basically write sort of a circuit diagram and even write differential equations describing it. And we're talking about B through D high school students. And it is possible to do that on a high school level. Certainly when I was a academic, I had to teach my PhD students technical writing. It can be taught directly. The reason why I don't do that anymore on the high school level is that it's just gotten to be too much. Between the standardized testing that essentially runs schools for the benefit of a few who can pirate off the system, which Obama told the whole country they didn't need to do as of the last year of his presidency, but 10 states decided that they were still going to do it, and I live in one of them, which is Florida. The cell phones that have completely abolished most children's ability to focus and to think about something. The complete lack of reading, because the problem of meeting the kids where they are, meaning let's not read anything difficult. And then most recently, AI-assisted cheating. It's gotten to the point where we have high school students who haven't read a book since third grade. And we have a lot of them that can't divide, or certainly can't do fractions. And that makes it very, very difficult to do the sort of stuff I was doing even 5 years ago. I am sure it is still happening at the more elite schools, because if you look at the few tests that are given internationally, the top 10% of American high school students really haven't changed in their ability to function on those tests. The rest, the bottom 90%, have fallen apart relative to rest of the Western countries. And it's, I think it's all those things put together make it very, very difficult now. So what I do now is pretty much directly find examples where it hits the daily news, where it's something going on, like if there's a news story about something happening on Thwaites Glacier, or if it's a news story about whatever happens to be relevant to whatever I'm teaching, and point out sort of the deeper background here. And some of the kids are going to get it and some of the kids won't. But what do you do at this point?
Wow, that's terrifying.
But you've also got things like today's Doonesbury, if you've seen it, where somebody asks the press secretary, the president has said he's reduced drug prices by 300, 400, 500%. but that's not the way percentage works. And we taught that to everybody in 4th and 5th grade. And the press secretary says, well, he skipped 4th and 5th grades. Nobody could believe it.
I mean, it doesn't help when the administration has an ongoing, decades-long campaign to undermine trust in institutions, right? That's really problematic. So, I mean, having skepticism is a healthy part of what science is as a project, and that's sort of internal to the processes of science. But I think it's not a good idea for public policy and for the administration to be undermining trust in both the administration itself and in like the core processes that keep perpetuating progress in society. I mean, whatever they happen to be. Science is one of them. There are others. And in science, the challenge of being able to rely on results is that you may not be able to is something that's that's discussed. So there's this notion of something called the replication crisis, or the reproducibility crisis, which is that a lot of scientific results cannot be reproduced, and that's a cornerstone of what science is. And so if you can't reproduce results, then well, how can you trust what's actually being published? There are perverse incentives, that is to say, you don't really, as a researcher, get a lot of support for reproducing a study that's already been done. If those incentives are changed, that might push back on this replication crisis. But it's a problem that's kind of baked in at the moment. We need to figure out how to make that better.
You know, there's an underlying theme here that you don't hear people talk about much. And I initially, when I was about to say this, I wanted to talk about ambiguity, but what I actually want to talk about is margin of error and reliability. When we see, and Brock, this is pitching this over to you, when we see charts and graphs and stuff like that, they have absolute numbers on them. And we don't often see a visualization of how much variability there is. And I think that gives in the public, in the journalistic world, a real false sense of confidence in numbers. And I'm particularly seeing this in economics right now, where most of what I see is complete garbage. Yeah.
I mean, it won't inspire confidence, Karen, that so there's research on visualization literacy. So how literate are people in understanding basic charts and graphs? And the numbers are not good from that result. People don't really necessarily have better than a basic understanding of how to read and interpret charts. So for the broad public often doesn't. So visualization literacy is an area that can certainly be improved. But I'm one thing that gives me confidence is that in public-facing media, there are really good players that are doing visualizations that are simple, revealing, interpretable, and relatively easy to read. I'm pretty happy about most of the charts and graphs that are produced in The Economist are very straightforward and easy to read. And New York Times has an excellent data visualization team, and their work is very solid, and it's based on principles of data visualization. And, I mean, those are just two examples of two particular media outlets. But hopefully, if they are, if they're effective, then others will become effective as well. I mean, I have a whole collection of really bad visualizations that have been done by major media outlets too, that are good for chuckles in class. But hopefully, the more that there's good dissemination and best practices that are done for visualization, that will translate into broader understanding and better literacy of visualizations. But it's certainly a problem. Yeah.
Brock, quick question about your class. You're obviously in a department that's about technical communication. Do scientists from other departments, students, have to take your classes on data visualization?
They don't have to, but they are welcome to.
Do they often?
From time to time, yes, yes. But I mean, there are forces that prevent that from being possible, like people's schedules and the amount of people, the availability of room in the class. At a public land grant university, we have pretty full classes, so there's not always room for people to move around between their degree programs. I am happy to say, though, we have some of the world experts in data visualization in the computer science department, Jeffrey here and Mike Bostock. Actually, he's not at UW right now, but there's people who are working very hard to make visualization more accessible and more publicly available, and people doing research in how to do that as well. So yeah.
Well, one of the real problems there is that it's also very easy to use such visualizations to hide things and to lie. And there is a lot of incentive to, for example, the administration to lie about what they're seeing and to put the information out there in an obscure way that makes it look as if it means something else.
I mean, one of the problems is that, like, when you put something into a chart, we're taught from, like, second, third grade or whatever, you're supposed to be able to trust that information is reliable. And people get the impression that if something's in a chart, that it must be true, it must be correct. And that's assuming they can read the chart properly. They're not necessarily taught to question the provenance of that data. So where did that information come from? I mean, all data is situated and data is not neutral, right?
No.
Even data that you can trust. So healthy skepticism, I think, is the best way forward, right? Teaching anyone to have a skepticism about what they're looking at and to probe and find, what reasons can I trust this? That's super important.
Well, and data can be completely accurate and be completely right for one purpose, and then be used by somebody else to say something completely different. If I'm looking at the information that Customs collects about oil imports and the information that the Department of Energy publishes about imports, they're looking for very different things. And they use different definitions of common words like month, the United States, and oil. And if you don't specify well, this is where the ambiguity question comes in, Karen, you were talking about. If you don't specify properly, you don't know what it means. And we have a basic problem in measurement.
A good current example of this is the definition of oil.
Yeah.
Because we've invaded Venezuela to get oil, but it's not the kind of oil that we're getting from Saudi Arabia. It's like saying I went to the store to get cornflakes and somebody came back with sugar-coated Fruit Loops. It's completely different, but we call it all oil and cereal.
Yeah, or if they came back with Fritos, which would be exactly the same material as cornflakes, but have a completely different usage.
Not for breakfast.
Yeah. I sometimes eat Fritos for breakfast.
To point out that
I'll be with you in a minute. To get into sort of a political end of this, one of the key issues for looking at scientific information is the quality of the sample that you're taking. And many, many years ago in the 1960s, Gladys and Kurt Lang, who I urge you to look up in Wikipedia, did a absolutely classic study where they were the first people, I believe, to talk to people coming out of the polls to find out how poll results being announced on the East Coast were influencing voting on the West Coast. And one of the things that I think about when I think about that study is that people used to be pretty willing to tell people, pollsters, information, and now they're not. So the sample they're getting is completely different. And I would guess that people with certain types of political views are much less likely to talk to pollsters, thus giving you very inaccurate results when you interview the person on the street.
And this goes to something that I was working towards, which is we measure what it's easy to measure. Then we claim it's what we wanted to measure. Right? There are many things that it's very easy to measure. For example, weight is easy to measure. Height is easy to measure. So from weight and height, we get BMI, which is a totally useless number. But we claim it means something. Because there's a correlation.
It was never intended to apply to individuals. It was intended to apply to trends overall in an entire society.
Yeah.
I would say that the thing that you haven't hit on yet in terms of those sorts of studies, when we're talking about, say, nutrition or other health-related studies, is the size of the sample population. So a lot of what came out in the 90s as what you should be eating is dead wrong because they were based on very small studies. I think the one that I've followed the closest is the studies based on the British database, where they had 30 years worth of data on about a third of the entire country of Great Britain. And they had very extensive data. And the statistics is just a lot more powerful when you have that many numbers to work with. Now, granted, Great Britain does not represent every single sort of demographic in the entire world, and one has to keep that in mind, but it's still better than a tiny study.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sometimes things that were stated as true in the 1990s are dead wrong now, and the issue is just bigger sample size.
Yeah, well, any statement that is true can become false if you look at it from a different angle.
One of my favorite
There's no such thing as absolute truth.
One of my favorite statistic stories that involves sample size was I was covering a school system in a Connecticut city, and it was at a point where fewer and fewer children were being born, and there were fewer and fewer kids coming into first grade. So the school was making a decision, the system, to close several of their elementary schools. It was a large city. And indeed, you looked at the numbers, and there were fewer and fewer kids enrolling in first grade every year. And I was the reporter covering this. And I went to the hospital and discovered that actually there weren't that many fewer children being born. So what was happening? The answer was the parents were enrolling them in the parochial schools, which were much better than the local schools. And when this came out, there was a huge uproar in the town. But it was so easy. Everyone had just been writing every year, fewer and fewer kids need to close schools because we weren't looking at a large enough data set.
I mean, once again, you're pointing to, Karen, like the challenge of translating things. Like public policy is one thing, whereas like scientific research kind of is another kettle of fish, right? One of the ways that's kind of exciting about the way that, or one of the tools that we've been using in, at least for data science and in scientific research that involves large amounts of data, to push back against this is called Jupyter Notebooks, JUPYTER, which are essentially notebooks on, like, they're digital notebooks where you can put both the code and the data sources into your public facing. It's like a scientific notebook that's kind of visible and inspectable. So if you have scientific results and you use data to get to those results, you can make completely transparent all of your processes, all the code you've been writing, all the ways you've been manipulating the data to get it to be, usable and manageable, so that it's inspectable. And that transparency hopefully gives people more confidence in how you've come to your results. And so that's been one way, at least in data science and information science, that we've been, trying to make the work more accountable, right, and more transparent. So that's just one way. I mean, there are other ways, but that's one.
One thing I want to talk about data transparency. I was involved in a longitudinal study with an enormous data set, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids, and our results each year or two that we did these repeated testings, the results were becoming less and less defined. We were getting more of it's a wash. And when you have millions of dollars in grant funding, you do not want your results to be ambiguous. And I observed researchers removing certain kids from the data set because they weren't quite right. And it was clearly they were massaging the data. And there is enormous pressure in the social sciences to massage data because they want you to have a yes or no conclusion when what you really have is a continuum.
I think where that is dealt with in the actual scientific literature is in the method section. So if you publish everything you did with the data, and then an expert in the field can look back at it and make other conclusions. But that's not a forum that is meant for the average person to be looking at. I mean,
if it's done properly, it's done in the methods section. But there is, again, as Karen says, a lot of incentive not to do it properly.
Well, these people were not just doing it randomly, but they were saying, we're looking for kids who had a particular result, who also had other ambiguities going on. Like they reported there was difficulty finding the family, or the kid was sick on the day they did the test. And they were pulling that to get the result.
If it is disclosed, if it is right in the same paper, this is exactly what we did with the data. I don't really have that much of a problem with it. I mean, I was doing a fair amount of work for my union and for the union at the national level. And one of the things that I realized is that nobody had ever studied and documented the effects of standardized testing. I was doing a literature search for the project that I was doing for the national union, and I was like citing studies with 12 people in it from Saudi Arabia and things like that. And it was bizarre to me. But then I went and essentially has surveyed all the teachers that were teaching a certain subject, and found overwhelmingly that the standardized testing were keeping from doing what was considered best practices. And I mean, the fact that nobody had ever done this before, it ended up getting discussed at the national meeting for the union and in their newsletter. And I probably would have been talking to Tim Walz and Harris had about this, because it underlied some of their strategy on standardized tests for the union, had some different results come from the last election. But it's just astounding to me that nobody felt it was worth ground truthing these sorts of things.
Well, when I was working with the Language of Data project back in the 80s, one of the principal investigators had done a accumulated index of all the statistics textbooks through about 1980, and found out that none of them defined either datum or comparison. So since statistics is about comparing data, you're doing an undefined thing to an undefined thing. No wonder statistics is hard to teach.
Well, it's also, I mean, sometimes the actual field, an entire field misunderstood things. I had something like that come up in my postdoc, where I looked at some data. It was a new thing that I had never done before. And I said, wait a second, they had to have done the statistics wrong. This really should have been standard error rather than standard deviation as the proper statistic for comparing the numbers. And then I found that for the last 30 years, the entire field had done it wrong. And fortunately for me, as a postdoc, I didn't have to publish this and make the argument, because the lab of a National Academy member came up with the same conclusion at the same time and published that. So I just had to cite him.
Yeah.
Much safer.
Much safer, yes.
You know,
Right.
something occurred to me about visualization of data. And this is going to sound weird, but what is the role of color in visualization of data? Do certain colors create an emotional response in people?
Absolutely.
Yeah, no question about it. Color is, that's like that's an entire class, but we try to cover it in a week. Color has a big influence on how you are able to understand information. It's one of the primary encodings for data representation. It is a pre-attentive visual attribute. That means by which Jacques Bertin meant that it is something that you get for free, like it's perceptual. So you don't have to use, like if you see, if you don't have a CVD, color vision deficiency, and you can see red and green and blue, and you see something that's blue, you don't have to think about that to get it for free. Like it's blue, you perceive it. It's not something that you have to use your mental faculties to think about. And so you can use this in data visualization to encode data values without having to cause additional cognitive load, right? So there are, Andrew Lucas says, I have CVD. So there are specific color palettes that are developed to accommodate representation of data for people who have CVD, and best practices are to use color vision deficiency palettes to the degree that you can. I will say that a lot of the consumer-facing products that allow you to make visualizations take advantage of the fact that we use color for data understanding and data perception, and usually have CVD palettes that you can just apply. Some of the world color experts in data representation are working at places like Tableau and Microsoft and build these into their products. And we've had them as guest speakers in our program because we're in Seattle and we can just do that. It's nice to have well, it's good to have those people close by. But I guess getting back to what you're saying, Karen, like there are definitely best practices and approaches to using color to do data encodings that are more or less successful. But it's not. Unfortunately, most people don't have training in how to do that. And if you're faced with how to represent your data effectively and use color to do certain encodings and with certain representations, the out-of-the-box solutions in consumer-facing products usually employ the best practices.
But there's
less is more, I think, is the short answer. Is if you're faced with it, try to use this as few colors as you can get away with.
Yeah, but there's also the question of what's the emotional impact of the colors, which Karen was vaguely.
That's one of the
color is culturally coded too, like so you can, that's another thing, and that ties into what you're talking about as far as like the emotional valence of color. But I think it's something to think about, but we also have to make sure that the encodings are accurate, right? We have to actually use color effectively in the first case so that you're conveying accurately what the data is representing, and then you should think about what the emotional valence is as well.
I did public relations at an international level, and when we were switching a particular thing over to our Japanese audience, we did change some of the colors because a particular color we were using to express danger and importance actually means childlike and playful in Japanese. So we ended up switching some colors on that, and you can do that just by asking people from the culture how they feel about these colors, and they'll tell you.
Right. If you want to, for those who are interested in color and data visualization, you can look for work by Maureen Stone, who is the color expert bar none who works at Tableau, or is the head of research at Tableau. I don't know if she still is, but she was recently.
So one of the things we have not talked about much is AI. Is AI something, and search engines? Obviously, there are lots of different kinds of large language models, but people are really using them. Kids are really using them a lot. Are there best practices for using AI to get at really good data as opposed to crappy data?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing, because you can make the argument that if you are in, say, a graduate seminar, that there are ways of using AI that might be interesting and might provoke thought. If you have an entire audience of graduate students who are all definitely interested in trying to get the most out of their education. But if you're talking about relatively low-level high school students, they're using it to cheat. So there's some very simple tricks, like, for example, you can circumvent Google's AI by under the little more tab, you check web, and it goes back to what a Google search was 5 years ago, where it only gives you the citations. And then I require the students include the citations for every fact they have, and then I'll randomly spot check it to see if they actually got the citations from that fact. So you really have to be intentional about it if you want to avoid just flat out cheating. And it's when you make it almost as difficult to actually do the work as to cheat, the number of students who will just give up and decide, all right, I'll just do the work, is significant enough. And in fact, an overwhelming majority, that it doesn't take being perfect about doing this as a way of dealing with students. It just takes intentional effort.
I was curious, does AI get confused between quality journals and crappy journals? Because I've noticed now there's this proliferation of scientific journals with names that sound almost like the prestigious journals. There's this burgeoning world of sort of crappy journals. Can AI
Many
tell
of
the
which have
difference?
stuff that's just written by AIs.
I mean, the problem, Karen, there is like we don't know how these models are trained. I mean, so it's impossible to know if they're getting, the direct along with the good stuff.
I would ask them
So,
to use only journals that had been around for more than 10 years.
I mean, you can cite
a-
only journals that have been around for more than 10 years, right? But again, like whatever is built into the model is kind of baked in depending on whatever iteration is released. So there could be the junk in there as well as the good stuff.
Yeah, again, if you're talking about customizable large language models where the person who's doing the research is actually intentionally doing all the training themselves versus actually just using the latest build of ChatGPT.
Okay.
So I'm kind of involved in an experiment right now with one of the major groups in speculative fiction writing is called Codex. And there is a new journal that basically came out and honestly said they're going to use AI in the editing. And so some of us decided that we were going to try it and see what was going on and submit to this journal. And they were paying 12 cents a word. So we submitted and we're kind of sharing behind a paywall, you must be a member wall to read this, our experiences with exactly what's happening with these journals. So it's, but the reason why I brought that up is that their AI, they claim, is completely sandboxed and completely customizable. And what they're using is to teach an AI to do flag problems in manuscripts the way that they would do it if they were doing it all by hand. And that is not possible with ChatGPT. There's no way that you can do that. You really incent, and there's also no plagiarism issues if you're paying for all of your content and you are disclosing that that's exactly what you're doing. And we're still going to have to wait and see. We're all still in the multiple iterations of revision stage that they haven't come out with their first issue yet. So we'll have to see how it works out. But I think that is less disturbing for me that somebody would have their own AI model, pay for all the data, and then train it on their own model with the goal of making it work like they would, as opposed to just using ChatGPT to do things.
Yeah, custom models are certainly the way to go. And you don't have the proprietary data problems if you're using custom models and training it with your own data sets. So that's
interesting.
That's good.
What'll be interesting, Allan, is to see if over time this magazine begins to evolve a specific tone, and instead of making everyone's stuff sound more like everyone's stuff, which actually is what human editors have tended to do.
Well, actually, though, they do have the authors themselves do all the edits. They're using the AI to come up with the suggestions, and it's essentially AI assisted humans coming up with the edits. And the question is, I mean, there's some other journals that refuse to let you use Grammarly anymore because they saw that it was not wrong, but essentially auguring against voice in fiction. And so that's something to watch for, is that there are journals that now say they're not going to accept it if you use Grammarly on your manuscript.
You know, it's interesting because Bob and I are currently editing this new book, Our American Storm, and we have 2 stories that are written in dialect. And my God, Grammarly would have gone psychotic over those stories. But what's essential to those stories is one is being written by a guy in a small village, and it's written in the dialect that he speaks. And the other one is written by a young, very disaffected barista. And it's very beautifully written, but it's totally the way this barista would be telling it to a friend of theirs, which I had to look up words because she was using slang I'd never heard of. And yet it's precious. It's priceless. And I wrote a note to Bob, let's not muck with this story because we want this voice. It's very genuine. It's not there's no errors. It's a genuine voice. And it's the experience of a 21-year-old person in this hostile environment. We want their voice. And Grammarly would have eaten that alive.
Yes.
There's been
the old Grammarly before it did AI would have eaten that alive.
There's been stuff done around this since long before the LLMs with the question of RP, the official British pronunciation and how that was attempting to get rid of dialects and different sounds and accents and all that, and the ways in which, for example, the BBC has moved a lot to using people who are Scottish or Irish or have other ways of saying the same thing. Things sound a lot different now than they did in the 60s because there's much more variation accepted. And the question of whether the LLMs and Grammarly and things like that are trying to get rid of this sort of differentiation is a very real problem, I think.
Well, you could probably train a model for any accent you want. I mean, it's kind of the way that...
But only one at a time.
Right. But it's kind of like the way that when I will do readings of short stories, if I've got it written in a dialect, I sit on YouTube on the language tutorials and figure out how to make that particular accent. But I can talk like I'm from New York. I could talk like this. I mean, I never lived in New York, never born in New York, but I can still talk like this if I need to for a story or something like that when I do a presentation. But it's you again customizing the AI to do a specific job rather than relying on what is out there for the public to use would be the way you could do that. I mean, there's still ethical issues with AI no matter what. The largest of which, to me, being the incredible use of energy, and, water, and all other things like that, which would be somewhat less of a problem if we weren't in a country that's just decided that the internal combustion engine and gasoline are probably the wave of the future. That would certainly magnify that as a problem.
They are the wave of the future.
One of the really scary things about data collection is that data is being collected, just huge amounts of data, taking up huge amounts of energy in case we need it, which is the surveillance state. There have been a couple of articles recently about people who were at protests and their faces were scanned. And then when they came to TSA, they were told, we've taken away your TSA clearance. You can't use TSA pre anymore because you were protesting. And it's very, very hard to be under the radar now.
Well, the Chinese social capital
can't
approach.
be under the radar. Yeah, I mean, that's so. I was Cory Doctorow is going around talking about his new book, Enshittification, which he explicitly talked about exactly this problem, and not even your case, Karen, of like making a political statement and having that translate into bad outcomes at TSA is one dimension of that. But I mean, just for but the number of people who are actually politically protesting is rather small, and it affects a small number of people. But more broadly, just everyone is always being tracked by all the platforms all the time, and we don't even know the ways in which our data are being used against us. And so that's even more concerning. And of course, he talks about that in his book. So you can't really know the degree to which your data is being used, to the benefit of the platformers, and the data can't use the platform without agreeing to that happening, right?
And the data is poorly defined and is not actually meaning what it says the people are using it to mean.
Back in the early days of computer surveillance, I was working for a healthcare company, and I was the editor of their magazine. And I was doing online searches. So, of course, the guys down in the IT department were looking to see if people were looking for pornography, what was going on. And indeed, it turned out we did have a couple of people who were doing exactly that. But I got hauled in. One day I get in and I can't get onto the internet. My account has been locked down. And I had to go through this 3-day exoneration because I had been doing research on breast cancer, and the word breast had upset everybody and locked me out of my account for 3 days.
Diversity is really upsetting too, apparently, these days.
And equity, which makes
how many grants were put on hold or canceled because of just like a keyword search? It's like
So it's interesting that now huge amounts of data are being collected, but the error rate seems to be substantial, and it's costing people grants and money and time and all sorts of things. And it's the misuse of data is as Kafkaesque as the use of it at the moment.
Yeah, it's with all this panic about the Chinese and ByteDance owning TikTok. I'm more concerned about people like Mark Zuckerberg owning my data. I can't imagine 2-minute videos of kids doing the latest dance is necessarily going to lead to World War III. But I think the big American tech companies and other international tech companies having all of our data concerns me more than China does. Because what's China going to do?
Right. Right.
Yes,
And
but
you
the
can't really-
algorithms that lead to those dances can also lead to things that will cause World War III. If you look at the way MAGA spreads.
Yeah, I mean, the problem I think just kind of that you are kind of pointing to, Alan, is that you can't really opt out. Like, it's not practical for me to just say, okay, I'm going to opt out of having my data collected so that I can use Google Maps, or because okay, what am I going to use? Apple Maps? I mean, am I sure my data is not being used there? Or like, okay, 120 million households have Amazon Prime. Their data is being collected. Like, most people have decided they're not going to have, they're going to use Prime, and that means they're signing up for having their data used in ways that they may not want to.
Even more, they're using Alexa, which is keeping track of a lot of things that they have no idea is keeping track of.
Yeah, and these are woven in, right, to how we just kind of live a modern life. And so part of that is signing up for being on that platform and getting your data collected. I mean, it's, Orwellian is exactly right? So only I think it's even more kind of more nefarious because it's not visible in the same way, like, that it's described in that book.
What becomes a problem is when government gets involved.
Yeah.
So, like, we had some walkouts last week in the schools in Florida over what ICE is doing.
As did we.
And there was a letter sent from the DeSantis' office saying that if any teacher is caught in any way encouraging these protests, they will go after them. And it's to me, that was telling.
Yeah, I mean, that's getting okay. I wasn't gonna say this, but of course, Jonathan Rauch has an article about this in an issue of the Atlantic, this week's issue of the Atlantic, or month's issue of the Atlantic, which is basically the F word now applies to this administration, right? So he wasn't gonna say it, but he finally said, okay, well, there's all these factors. And it's like, when the state is surveilling and then malevolently going after people because of information that the state has collected, that's pretty dark.
Yeah, I was getting for many years in using the word fascist. It applies.
Yeah, we are getting very close to the end of our time, so I'm going to ask if we can get both Brock and Alan to say a few words in summing up. If there's anything particular you want to say, Alan, why don't you go first?
Wow, this is this was pretty free flowing discussion. I'm not sure how one could possibly sum it up, but
then is there something you didn't say you want to say?
Do you want? Is the next question going to be what are we up to, and what do we want to plug? Will that be the next question, or
where do we go from here?
After we've done this?
Well, let's see. I would say that it is possible to understand the scientific literature, but it takes a serious commitment to do so. I think a science journalist, for example, if they can't read the scientific literature, they shouldn't be in that job. I think many politicians should not be in their job if they're not capable of doing that. But then there's many politicians shouldn't be on that job anyway for various other reasons. But there's also a role for science communicators, for people who realize that your average educated person really has no clue how to access this information, and being the link between what the New York Times article doesn't say and how the actual literature is inaccessible is a very important role. I mean, a lot of us, as a science fiction writer, that's a way of getting content onto my blog, is that I will do these sorts of things because they're of interest to people who read science fiction. But I think there are a lot of people doing that sort of stuff. And I think figuring out some that you trust to be able to do that linkage between what's not being said and what needs to be said is probably something someone who is not themselves capable of reading the scientific literature should probably look at if they're concerned with any issue that involves science in any way.
Mm-hmm.
I would just pile on and say +1 on everything you said on. And I think effective science communication is essential. We are not getting into a less complex world. If anything, our world is becoming more and more complex, and we need people who are good journalists, good science communicators to digest that information and help present it in a way that's understandable and tractable. Because, each of us lives our own complex lives and understands things maybe with our own area of expertise, but I can't be an expert in quantum mechanics, right? I need a good science communicator who can help me to understand that. I can be an expert in my area. And so, more power to the science communicators, I would say.
I just want to jump in and say that I've been trying to read one level down. For food information and nutrition, I read the newsletter Food Science News, which used to be free and now has some of it still is. There's a small fee. It's the most amazing insight into the food industry you can imagine. For health stuff, I read the local epidemiologist, who I think it is just, she's amazing. And she's now got a whole group of people. And I'm doing a Substack about information that is one level down. And it's really fun to do.
Wired magazine is usually pretty good at that.
Absolutely. Now that they're actually visually readable, they went through a phase where you could not read their pages. They've improved.
Well, that was the graphic design that was popular, some time ago. Luckily, that's gone away now.
Yes, they made it very hard to find out what page you were on, too.
Right.
Really hard.
It was a 90s trend.
Yes. So, a little bit from each of you about things you're doing and things you want people to be looking for.
Well, I have, this is what I've had out since June. This is with Rampant Moon Press. It is a eco-fiction novelette length, but the publisher had me append an essay on the science underlying the story and also the real world events underlying the story. So he's calling it hope punk because I'm probably more optimistic than most people who actually know what's going on in the sciences. So that this has been out, and the next one that I'm going to have out in a book form that you could actually put a handle on is actually even a short story. It's not even up to novelette length. I've got a story coming out called The Eliminator with Water Dragon Press. That should be out in about a month or so. I think the next thing that's going to come out after that is I have a story that I'm pretty proud of coming out in the issue 27 of Stupefying Stories. But you want to see either my blog, what I say about things that are of interest to people, or any of the stories that I've published, including a lot of free links or anything else. The way to find me is my name without the dash.com. So AllanDyen-Shapiro.com. And then you can find out what I'm up to.
Karen will type that into the commentary on Facebook so that people will be able to find it easily. Brock, do you have anything you're doing that you want people to go and look at?
Well, I'm mostly teaching and working on something called the Human-Centered Engineering Consortium, which is a collection of universities and industry that is trying to support human-centered approaches to engineering and how it's taught in practice. But that's what I'm working on at the moment. But I would like to offer people a couple of good books if they're interested in data visualization and how to do it better. There's a book called Now You See It by Stephen Few, who has a couple of other books, Few, F-E-W, and another book called Storytelling with Data, which is by Cole Knaflic, K-N-A-F-L-I-C. Those are really good resources for just, understanding what you can do with data visualization and how you can do it. And there is, Karen, a great poster on affective color palettes and visualization that was released by Maureen Stone from Tableau. So
okay,
Google that, and if you're interested, you can find that poster.
Actually, don't click on the link, Karen. Just spell my name.
Sorry.
Yes, D-Y-E-N rather than D-Y-A-N.
You're right.
So put it up there again.
There we go.
All right, there we go. All right, Bob, you want to take us out?
Oh, heck yeah. I'll make a minor note. You see that the land doesn't vote is that's one of my favorite examples of misleading data, because oftentimes when you see data presented these days on Facebook, it's often presented with the goal of confusing the issue or of misrepresenting the data. It is a big, beautiful map of the United States. It's almost all red. And it's a map of the counties that voted Republican or the districts that voted Republican. And some places where a county or a district is 200 square miles and has 3 voters that voted Republican, covers a lot of space. But then you see these little kind of dots and speckles of blue throughout. Well, the blue is where the people are. And the red is a lot of it is empty real estate. Not all, but a lot. And so it's an example of an incredibly misleading map that says, see, most of America is red. Well, guys, most of America is very sparsely populated. And I put a link up there for people who want to see it.
It's a good example. It's a good example of where color mapping to area can be misleading, right?
Yes.
Yeah. If you say this,
well, it depends on what you want to show.
Right.
If you want to show the physical area, color mapping can be great. If you want to show the population, it's not.
It's a really good map of where it's safe to wear your resist button or not safe.
Yeah. But anyway, I just wanted to make sure that people do that, because I used to, like the top 2 of you guys, I used to be more of a technical guy. I was a certified health physicist and did all the tracking and trending for my department. And the reality of it is data is, I said this in there, data is expensive. If you want good data, you're going to spend money getting it. And if the data is being used to make decisions, which what's the point of collecting it if you're not going to use it to make decisions? You need to understand whose ox is getting gored by this data. That is an incredibly powerful understanding you need to have when you're doing that, because I tell you, the most unsuccessful data collection project I ever went on, when I worked out at the one of the nuclear sites, was the fact that this data said, wow, we are wasting a couple $1 million a year on this process. And the counter, the feedback came back to, you realize we're spending $10,000 a year collecting this data, and it's being collected by people we have other uses for. And so they canceled the program to collect the data, but never once touched the waste that was associated with it. And so that is, as you guys, and I'm betting all of you understand with your what I will call your education, your smarts, is that people they have a position and they want data that supports their position. And if I'm going to put a piece of data out on Facebook, I'm going to copy the meme that supports my position, regardless of whether or not the data is accurate or not.
I want to push for people to remember that data is a plural noun, and not all data are equal.
Oh, by the way, I'm going to take your pedantic approach to that and say, you know what? when 75 or 80 or 90% of the world believes to be one way and uses it that way, you might want to just give up on the that element, because I know, but the people I am dealing with don't always know, and it makes me it doesn't help my case on that. Now, okay, Brock, you can smirk a little bit.
No, Bob, you know your audience.
Yeah. No,
That's
I know it's a
communication,
lost
is knowing
cause.
your audience.
I absolutely know it's a lost cause, but I do want to remind people that not all data are equal.
That is certainly true.
And if you start using data as a singular, it becomes much easier to confuse that.
Thank you. I appreciate your clarification. Smile, guys.
Okay.
Life is too short to
Thank
not.
you, everyone. I really enjoyed
Yes,
having you
this is
here,
great.
Brock and Allan.
Oh,
Thank you.
I still had a couple.
Thank you for having
points.
us.
Great conversation.
It has been a great conversation. I appreciate you all being here. Allan, good seeing you again. And Brock, I liked a lot of what you had to say.
Okay,
And
great.
I just want to remind people that we're going to be at RAD. Most of the people on this screen are going to be at RADCon in the Tri-Cities, Washington, Pasco, on February 14th. And we will look forward to seeing as many of you as who can make it. We've got Karen and I are working on a new book right now, Our American Storm. And we are, the reality is we are in an American storm. We are in a great contest that I think, what was it Lincoln said during the whether a country so conceived can last, when talking about democracy. We are actually in that test right now. We're in that case. We're knee deep in it. And so I urge you guys to, Allan, do what you can do to get out there and protest, because that's what you got to do. And so all of us got to stand up for the country, stand up for Minnesota. Okay.
Totally.
They are doing our work for us. They are the point of the tip of the spear. And if you ever, I will say to anybody here that's listening that is from Minnesota, thank you, because you're doing what's got to be done. And those of you who get out on the street corner and stand, wave your sign that says you're standing with Minnesota, you're doing the work. And so that said, now I will let Tom kick us off the air.
Well, and I'll say that, Bob, your publishing is doing the work too.
Well,
And
thank you.
Karen, your writing is doing the work. And Allan, your writing is doing the work too. And Brock, what you are doing is essential to the work that's going on.
I'm actually doing it. I would encourage people to, if you have a 3D printer, you can 3D print ice whistles, which is what I've been doing. And I don't have to stand up for 3 hours to do it.
Yeah. Well, and from each, what was it?
From each according to his
according to his
ability, to
means.
each according to his need.
Yeah.
Okay. And from each, those of us who have the ability and the resources to go out there and stand by the road, hallelujah. And
Yep.
those that can't, they still and still support the cause, to them our appreciation as well, because we've got to keep it up, because that we talk about Trump, but we don't talk enough about the people that are standing behind him, propping him up. He is the tool, the front man for the billionaires in the world. And whether or not Trump's name is in the internet or in the Epstein files, you know that most of their names are in it. And that's a complete case of trying to, oh, don't look over here, look over there, because you know that they're never going to sell Trump out. But with all the other names and all the other things that they've done, I want to know who wrote the email that said that little girl last night was a lot of fun. I want to see that name. I want to hear that in a congressional hearing where the congressman is looking at the deputy FBI director and saying, with that data, with that information, and remember, there's a big difference between data and information. Investigation and processes are what turn data into information. With that information, you tell me again why none of these people are eligible to be investigated. Yeah, they're pulling the shades over our eyes. They're pissing on our shoes and telling us it's raining. So let's keep after it. Oh, and thank you for that comment, Karen. Scott's Planet is indeed awesome.
It is totally awesome.
Yep.
Yes,
And,
I love it.
All right, we'll see y'all in a month for us and for other people with Bob.
Yes.
And see you next week, Tom.
Yep.
Okay.
Enjoy the con.
Thanks much, guys. Thanks for letting me have my speech.